Global instability. That seems to be the general theme of everything lately. It's not that all the videos I want to make speaking about all the protest actions and the difficulties going on all around the place, but it seems like that's the most things that are going on right now. And I think there are two sides of that that could have disadvantages to it. One side is the side where we become numb to some of the things in the pandemic. To, to anyone who doesn't believe that a pandemic is going on, there really isn't anything I could say to that. You're out there. If that's your belief system, there isn't a debate to be had if that's your belief system. Okay, that's your belief system. But to the rest of us that see that a pandemic is going on, the problem could be that as it continues going on and as it stretches longer and longer, some people could get burnt out about the different measures that need to be carried on to mitigate the factors, etc., etc. And then on the flip side of that, some people could get anxiety and could have those negative mental issues with the barrage of dark news that we are facing constantly, because daily just about all the headlines seem to point to a possibly bleak place for the world, possibly as you look on to the future. And it could seem with COVID, whenever somewhere seems like they're getting things under control, it just slips out and ends back up into this whole out of control seeming side. St. Lucia is seeing some new protocols being put in place to try to curb some of the new increase they're seeing. Jamaica is seeing some reintroduction of their more tougher lockdown measures because they're seeing a resurgence of their numbers too. And all around, many people are making preparations who haven't already seen the emergence of the Delta strain. Some people are making preparations for when the Delta strain, or if the Delta strain does come. We're seeing some of that over here in Trinidad and Tobago, with several extra beds being added to some of our health facilities in preparation for the possible arrival of the Delta strain, or as some people may say, it has already arrived. Well, over in Cuba, where they had the first set of protests, they had some results from that protest. In Cuba now, they have legalized small to medium-sized businesses. What does this have to do with a pandemic? Well, one of the problems they were having in Cuba, if you remember one of the videos I made earlier when they were having the protests over there, the protests over there, a little different from some of the other protests, didn't really have to do with the mandatory vaccines or anything like that. It had to do with the difficulties of the lockdown and surviving the lockdown and the pandemic in the first place, because Cuba is a communist country and they didn't allow private businesses. And one of the primary ways to uplift people out of poverty, this is a proven fact, is to allow them to have control over their own resources. So that's the private business side. But even beside that fact, they are also under an embargo from the US, so trading is more difficult. But the people in the streets were protesting for freedom. They were not protesting the embargo, they were protesting for more freedom. And it seems like the Cuban communist government has obliged that request. Cuba legalizes small and medium-sized private businesses. Cuba's communist government has legalized small and medium-sized private businesses in the wake of mass anti-government protests last month. Under the new rules, enterprises with up to 100 employees will be allowed. President Miguel Diaz-Canel said Cuba was taking firm steps to update its economic model. Critics say the government plans have been accelerated because of July's protests, when thousands turned out to complain of economic ruin. Demonstrators condemned the handling of the coronavirus pandemic and demanded political change. Dozens were arrested nationwide, and at least one man died in the unrest. Friday's decision is seen as a major shift in government policy on the island, where state-run companies are the norm. The protest came amid a severe economic crisis. Okay, so in Cuba, the economic norm is that the government runs everything, but due to the protests, they had some changes in that. Because of the protests also, the Organization of American States wanted to have a meeting with CARICOM to discuss the Cuban future, but just a note on that entire event. The CARICOM members told them, hold up, that's not our business. We are not getting into that. That's a part I actually kind of like about CARICOM. Many people complain about the interventionalist style of the United States, where it seems like they're always in everyone's business. And I could understand that, especially when you're on a larger scale as they are. I do not agree with it, but I could understand some people's argument for it. But the CARICOM, most of the CARICOM diplomacy when it comes to international relations seems to say that is now we business. And I like that. We Caribbean people, we are really good at minding other business and macroing and that kind of thing. But we do that within our own island. When you see it comes to the affairs of Cuba and Venezuela and the United States, let these other countries see about their own business. CARICOM countries threaten boycott of OAS Council meeting to debate situation in Cuba. Caribbean community countries have threatened to boycott a meeting of the Organization of American States scheduled for later on Wednesday if the request for a debate on the current situation in Cuba is not placed on the agenda. So, one of the problems is that the CARICOM states have offered Cuba entrance into these organizations for quite some time now, and Cuba has refused it. So, I understand fully from the CARICOM side, if they refuse to enter into our official arrangements, then why are we looking to get involved in this? Mind your business. I am in agreement with that because over here in the Caribbean with the CARICOM states, we have our own difficulties to see about, with St. Lucia now having to enforce new protocols coming in St. Lucia as spike continues. And it's not fully surprising, it's kind of expected. If you were following the news in St. Lucia, they recently had an election. I think the election would have possibly been just about 2 weeks ago. So, you know that 2 weeks after the election business. Trinidad, when we had our election last year, we had a similar thing going on. Just as our election went through, just after our election, we saw a spike in the numbers, and it was kind of expected because we had crowding for the election, and St. Lucia had a similar thing. Due to the increase in COVID-19 cases, the Office of the Prime Minister will soon be announcing the changes to the present protocols, which will come into effect from August 13th, 2021 to August 31st, 2021. That's according to the Ministry of Health, which reported that 76 cases were recorded today, along with 2 COVID deaths. 58 cases were recorded on Sunday and 66 cases were recorded on Saturday. So they are having a steady increase, it would seem. All of these new cases were seen at various community respiratory clinics where they were assessed and tested for COVID-19. In keeping with the COVID-19 testing protocol, these individuals were placed in home quarantine by healthcare practitioners while awaiting receipt of their COVID-19 test results. Arrangements have since been made to place them in isolation. The contact tracing for these new cases is currently underway. So St. Lucia is seeing a spike, and they are now going to go back into their not more severe, but more stringent lockdown policies. And with these things, the contemplation I did, that would have been, 2 days ago, I think. The contemplation I did where I asked, what is the target? When I see these lockdowns that seem to be just following the internet definition of insanity, where repeating the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. If we lock down, and then we reopen, and more people mix, and the numbers rise, and we lock down again. What is the aim at this? When is this cycle going to end? What is the end game of this? What is the end point of this? And you must understand, I hope that the governments understand at some point in time, this continuous cycle of lockdown, reopen would frustrate a population, and you may get a much more unruly population to deal with. But it's not only St. Lucia. Jamaica is also seeing that they have to reintroduce these measures, stricter COVID-19 measures enforced as virus cases rise. With COVID-19 cases continuing to rise, Prime Minister Andrew Holness announced stricter COVID-19 measures, including adjusted curfew hours to curtail the rapid increase in cases. And just recently, Jamaica removed some of these curfew restrictions, and some of the people were partying it up, and many of the people didn't want to get vaccinated either. So it's par for the course. It's what was expected. And again, I ask, as we see this going on and on, sometimes I wonder if it cannot be that I am smarter than some of these leaders of the Caribbean countries. I don't think that is it. I don't think of myself that highly, but I wonder why it is sometimes that these very predictable problems aren't addressed, or are they being addressed behind the scenes and we just aren't being told about it? At least me, I'd like to know, how are we going to address this? What is the end game? How are we escaping this? Because I do not want it to be that we reach in the situation like where St. Vincent has reached, where they have the protests that spilled over into the streets with the violence occurring. The woman that was arrested, she recently pleaded not guilty. I think that case, how that case is handled and the end result of that case is going to be kind of crucial to see how the peace in the islands continue. Woman pleads not guilty to wounding St. Vincent's Prime Minister. Anna-Mae Lewis, a 56-year-old vendor of Layou, appeared before a Kingstown magistrate this morning charged with wounding Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, during a protest last Thursday in Kingstown. Now, bear in mind, think about this. A 56-year-old vendor. You're understanding the class differences already here. A 56-year-old vendor, and the lady is of Afro descent, and she wounded the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who is not of Afro descent and who would obviously be at a different social class level than a street vendor. So let's keep that in mind. She entered a not guilty plea to the charge and was granted bail with one surety in the sum of EC $3,000. The matter was adjourned to September 15th. There were emotional scenes outside the court as relatives of Lewis gathered to lend support. Now, this, as I said, I think would be interesting in the handling of this going further on. I heard the Prime Minister of St. Vincent, he said that he is taking it as an attack on his life, because if you throw an object at someone's head, you are attempting to kill them. And I hope, I understand that it could go down that line, but I hope it doesn't, for peace sake. I don't think that would be the ideal thing for peace sake. But in St. Vincent, the police are promising to get much more serious about their public order and about the Public Order Act, and they are going to be much more strict with the enforcement of it. And I anticipate to see the result of this in the coming days. I hope that we can see resolutions to these matters without more violence, because the truth of it is, agree or disagree with the mandates and how they are going to be carried about. The truth of it is, if the violence in the streets continue, it wouldn't help either case. It wouldn't help to decrease the numbers in the pandemic. It wouldn't help to decrease the numbers of people infected. Nor would it help to stop it may help to stop some of the mandatory vaccinations. But if you're so worried about it and you reach to a violent stage, very likely you may kill the whole impetus of your movement. Nearly every movement, when it gets violent, the support for it dies and dwindles. The public doesn't have support for violent movement. And much more if you're trying to get support from some people who are vaccinated. And it is possible. I saw over in Italy that there are some people who are vaccinated who are burning their vaccinated cards, their proof of vaccination, in solidarity with the unvaccinated people, because they are fully against some of these mandatory vaccination methods. And something that I continually like to point out, and I point this out as I reach to the end here, we are not the same as some of these larger countries. Some of the fears that they have in the larger countries are fully substantive. Italy went through the torture of having a literal fascist leader ruling their country and taking over for some time. So when you see some of the fears that they have and how they react to some things, I think that sometimes in Trinidad, in some of these islands, we react in a similar manner, not fully understanding that sometimes the history and the politics of those countries lend for different things than us. Some reactions that I may even support over in France, I may think unnecessary in Trinidad. Not that I think that human nature is so much different when you're talking about French people and local Trinidadians, but just on the power scale and the capability of our politics, I just see things a little different in that. What do you think? Don't forget to click that like button if you haven't clicked that yet. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed also. And I'll see you again tomorrow for the next video.
Feel the music rising with the time.